Okay, so we're going to talk about convergence. And if you are new to the business, there's still a lot of phone systems out there that, one, are not connected to a network, a local area network, that are still analog or digital, because we still sell a lot of digital phones, which is interesting. And the reason for it is they're simple, they work, they don't need a network, and you don't need an IT guy. Why does a pizza shop need IP phones? We just have 3 phones, and we don't need to overcomplicate it. But we're going to talk about how we slowly build a network and why that's important. So integrating key or PBX to Ethernet routing, voice and data network integration, single site compared to multi-site, and then what is this session border controller and all these other kind of application technologies, that are part of convergence. So again, if you have any questions, there's not a stupid question, please ask it. So as we move through this, we still talk about access, server, software, and devices, but now a couple of things have changed, right? So we start to talk about, when we're moving into convergence, we're not talking about analog and digital trunks and DIDs and things like that. You're starting to have conversations with your partners about SIP. What's the value of SIP? How are we integrating your wireless phones back into your network? How are we pushing presence out to your wireless phone? Are we using SIP trunks to come into a converged network? Those type of things. How can we consolidate our trunks? Because the network is getting a little bit more complicated. And if we use traditional technologies, it could be more expensive. We may actually be talking about reducing the footprint of a phone system since we don't have analog and digital and things like that. We're just running pure SIP phones with a SIP server, and software, that type of thing. So we're needing a data network. Telephony servers, we talked about, is it an appliance Avaya provides, loaded with our software and our VM and all that. So for instance, another reason why you might buy a virtualized server from Avaya instead of buying the server and then loading the virtualized software yourself, you may not be qualified as an end user to deal with VMware. We will preload the VMware and we will support it. So that could be a possible reason why you would buy an Avaya appliance instead of providing yours. Telephony software, IP or CM, or Aura, we would say. This is an old slide. We don't provide network switches, but we did talk about 3500, 3600, 3800, 3900 from Extreme. And then network software, advanced routing, and security. Because as you are bringing sites together and you're doing it all over a wide area network, networking becomes key. He talked about fabric networking. We talked about data center, the edge, and the campus, right? Does everybody understand that concept pretty well? The edge, what an edge switch is? Tim, you know what an edge switch is?
You're talking about the end?
Yeah, the edge of the network.
The end of it.
Yeah.
Like coming into the building.
No.
Or from the router?
No, well, we would consider the edge is that if I go and I plug a phone or a PC into the wall right here, if I plug a phone into the wall right here, that's the far edge of the network. And then what we're going to do is that wire that goes up through there, it has to be within 328 feet of a switch, right? Because that's category 5 or category 6, 328 feet. And then after 328 feet, I have to have a fiber that runs to the to another switch someplace, and that's usually somewhere in the network, like a campus switch someplace, and that might be up the hill, it might be in another closet, something like that. And then where's the data center? Did we virtualize our data center? Is it off, or is the data center over in the other building up the hill? So there's sort of 3 parts to a network. A small business has 1 part to a network. It's usually an Ethernet, a wire that runs to a switch that runs to a router that goes out. No big deal. All right. in an environment like this, you're going to have one size switch in the closet running a fiber back to another size switch that aggregates all of this, and another fiber that runs up the hill to their data center. And in the data center, you might have larger modular switches, in their routers and things like that. You may or may not have it. If you're talking about K through 12, where you have 100 schools and 10,000 students, you're going to have your elementary schools are all all staying within the building and then routing up to another, part of the network. And then you got all your middle schools and then all your high schools, and it all works its way up to a data center. So depending on the type of switch and the manufacturers you buy, they've gotten away with routers where the switching can do a lot of the routing, for you. So it's a switched infrastructure with the capabilities to route. And then the devices, you can see, we're not talking about analog and digital and all that. We're talking about, personal computers and mobility and soft phones and video to communicate with. So this is more, as we're converging networks together, the network starts to get more sophisticated. So a little bit of history here. IP telephony was when we were kind of, taking telephony features and being able to take them across a network, and the ability to plug an analog device or a digital device, but go across a data network, and what were the things that you needed. If you've been around for a while, it all started off with voice over frame relay. I don't know if you remember that or not, but we sold these devices that we would plug, the phones into, or a phone system into, and it would take it and route it over a frame relay network. It was ugly, ugly, ugly. I mean, in the very beginning, it got better, and then, networks got better, and, the way they were routing. Then we moved into voice over IP, and then we started to converge, all of it together where we could do just about anything over an IP network. Multimedia, video, fax, and data. Everybody remember in the early days, and this may be a Peter question, where you would plug in a fax machine into the Ethernet network, and you would try to fax on it, but the fax would come out on the far end all screwed up because the IP network was so clean and so crisp and so clear. It almost garbled the fax manufacturers were used to a network that wasn't that clean, and they cared for that. So we had to do certain things to a network to make sure that the fax is like voodoo technology again. I mean, to scan something and then take it and transmit it across the network was back in the day and even to this day, sometimes it's not that easy. For some manufacturers, we got it somewhat down to a science. But some things that have been around for a very long time, and I'll show you, don't always appear to be that easy. So integrating key or PBX and Ethernet routing in the past, standalone key, tie lines, E&M, tie lines, okay, that was they worked very well. So we've been tying things together for a very long time across telephone company tie lines. Standalone applications at each site. So back in the day, if you had 10 locations, 5 locations, whatever, you'd have 5 voicemail systems, you'd have 5 key systems, you'd have 5 whatever contact center stuff, and it was expensive. And now that we've converged the network, we can have one contact center providing routing for all locations. We can have one voicemail system, one email system if you're into email. That's kind of enterprise design. You don't have to have 5 email systems, First generation Ethernet routing, we used to have hubs, right? So you would have, and it was like 1996, which doesn't seem that far away, but for some of you, I guess it is. Depends how young you are, but everybody had hubs. So that meant you had 10 megabits in a whole box. And then the year they came out with 100 megabits or maybe even 10 megabits per person, it was like we couldn't sell enough switches. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. We were making money hand over fist. And then, oh my God, they came out with 100 megabits per person. You know, that's when data networking got really crazy because, you know, a hub back in the days was just like a huge bottleneck, you know, but then we weren't transmitting data like we are today and images and the stuff that we're doing. So first generation IP telephony. It's kind of interesting. Now this isn't so different today, although that's a pretty crummy picture, than what you'll find in a lot of locations. This is a pizza. I don't know why I use the pizza shop, but you know, they've got a couple phones and they just need a little IP office so that maybe after hours they can take messages or maybe put a call on hold, that kind of stuff. So you might have a very small IP office with 2 or 3 telephones. And you know what, there's no real reason, you know, to connect the PC to the phone system if all we're doing is point of sale data, if all we're doing is transmitting, you know, something at the end of the evening, you know, to a server. You know, why are we integrating to a phone system? Because this PC isn't going to do voice over IP, you know. I mean, they don't need it in the pizza, you know, and a lot of small businesses out there don't need necessarily to integrate their data. Now, if we want to put a soft phone application, you know, like Equinox or something like that, on here and be able to make a call from here to there, then we're going to have to throw a line in between those two and connect that switch to that phone system. Okay? Does that make sense? Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. Oh, look, there's a line. And we updated the PC. So now with this, there may not be a real reason to communicate this with, you know, to make phone calls in between, but the phone system might need to do something with the data network. It might, you know, need to integrate to a device, you know, overhead paging or door openers or whatever. But now, since I've connected that data switch to an IP office or whatever the call server is, let's just call it a call server until I can't remember that name. But now I can put a piece of software on there and I can call between the two. Okay, so I don't have to buy a $289 telephone because my soft phone software came with the IP office software that I bought. You know, I bought 10 licenses for my phones, and it came with, you know, soft phone for my PC, and everything works just fine. Loop start, ground start, DID. You can see right here that we didn't change from a trunking standpoint. Remember, we had access, server, software, and device. Very low end access. Loop start, ground start. No PRI, no DID, no SIP, none of that. It's just very simple, right? Next generation. Now, in this situation right here, we were doing, this was a digital phone. I don't know why I said Cat 5 because it didn't need to be a Cat 5. It could have been a Cat 3 for a digital phone. But now we're going to do, we're going to plug an IP phone into that switch. And now we're going to take calls from the outside world. It's going to route over to the switch and it's going to ring the phone. I pick up the phone and I dial 3 digits and I ring that phone, or 5 digits or whatever. You know, so this is, and you know, in this case, I haven't loaded any call software on that PC, but this is a real world scenario where, you know, I'm slowly migrating into the IP world. So I've got an older IP office, you know, I'm going to upgrade the IP office, and I'm going to start adding phones as my customer can afford to add IP phones. Very simple from that standpoint. Pretty easy to follow, right? Now, multi-site locations. Let's say that I have, I've got an office with locations in Columbia and Greenville and Charlotte and Atlanta, right? I've got a network between the locations or at the locations because I'm already, pushing data between the locations and print jobs and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, well, why don't I take advantage of that network and put voice across it? I can start making phone calls between locations, between cities, and not incurring long distance charges, right? Because I'm doing it over the data network. Now, we all know that your data network has to be a little bit better than just pushing data because, data isn't real-time, information where voice is. But, by having small community networking software on the IP office, what have you noticed about this? So 3 of the locations have an IP office and 1 location has a what?
Switch.
Just a switch. I don't need an IP office in Atlanta? That's a resounding no. The reason why I don't need an IP office in Atlanta is that, I have 1 person there and I already have a data circuit there, so I can just go and plug a phone into the data switch and it's connected, it routes automatically to the IP office, right? The telephone knows where the IP office is sitting at and it just automatically routes. So if this was my home office and I've got a data switch in my home office, a little router thing that I bought at Best Buy, all I do is plug in buy a phone into my home office and it knows where to find the IP office because it's programmed in that 135.blah, and it's going to route and find that IP office somewhere out in the real world, right? So, in some situations, you don't need to have a phone system to have locations all over the place, from that standpoint. In fact, this building down here doesn't have a phone system in it, but it has hundreds of phones in it, right? Because it's connected through a network, wide area network or local area network, up the hill to the phone system that's up there. All of these wires don't run all the way up the hill to that phone system. They have to route somewhere, from that standpoint. Now, you would say to me, Pete, why do we have an IP office here? And why do we have an IP office over there? Or why do we have IP offices at all? Well, obviously, you're seeing analog and digital. So if I had analog and digital because I've got a guard shack or I've got out on the football field at the high school, I've got to have a phone that's more than 328 feet and I'm not going to pay for fiber, then I need a gateway to be able to run my analog phones out there, so I've got an analog phone, right? The other thing you would say is that this location in Columbia has 200 people there, and God forbid if the network goes down here, what would I do for those 200 users right there? Well, you notice that this location has its own local trunks. Okay, so if the network went down, it can fail on itself, or it could be standalone depending, but it would fail on itself and be able to stand alone and run all the phones, make calls, receive calls, things like that. Or if I had all of my trunks there in Greenville coming into the network and everything had to go through the network and out of the network and all that, I'd have to have bigger lines here and there, and it might cost me more money instead of just putting in some local trunks in a gateway. So when you're doing network design and architecting a network, you're taking all of this into consideration: the cost of my data circuits between locations, the availability of what type of data circuits I have. Do I need to be survivable? Yes or no? What type of telephones do I need to have? Yes or no? Now, if I had, in Charlotte, if if I had 10 telephones, you know that those 10 users all have cell phones, so no one's going to die. Everybody's going to be able to dial 911. No big deal. All right. But for a call to get to Charlotte, if I had to go through Greenville to get to Charlotte, I'd either have to have an 800 number, or I'd have to have a Greenville number that rang into, or I'd have to reroute my SIP trunking through Greenville to get to Columbia, and that may just be too complicated. I've already printed all my advertising for Columbia. The Columbia people all know my number. I don't want to change my number. So, sometimes it's easier just to have a little gateway here for survivability, for local trunking, for analog, digital, or IP, for maybe, its own messaging, things of that nature, right? Make sense? Any questions? Good. So it's, now in this situation too, how many voicemail systems do you see up there? Yeah, only one voicemail. Remember back in the day, if I had 4 locations, I'd have to have 4 voicemails. If I had 4 locations, I'd have to have 4 phone systems. So, this is some of the advantage of kind of converged networking. You can do a lot of things we couldn't do in the past. Now we're getting a little bit more sophisticated because we have all sorts of different things going on, and we've moved now from analog trunks to SIP trunks, okay? And we're not just coming in from the phone company with analog. Remember, here's kind of loop start, ground start, T1 PRI. Loop start, ground start, T1 PRI, those are all kind of maybe phone company or traditional service provider type circuits, SIP can come from a lot of different places. But now with this, we're looking at different types of internet companies providing services. The public, the phone company, PSTN, and other types of people providing services. But now we're going to, instead of having, maybe 2 or 3 PRIs, which would be, anything from, 46 circuits to however many you want over that SIP connection from the carrier, we're going to terminate it into a session border controller. And the session border controller does a lot of different things. One of the things that the session border controller does is it's sort of a firewall between whoever's IP network and our IP network. We don't want the phone company to be looking into our data network and seeing what we're doing or sniffing or hackers or anything like that. And that's what a session border controller will do. And most cloud providers in their data centers have session border controllers if you're making phone calls and, in and out. Another thing a session border controller will do is that, if you're doing VPN, virtual private networks, and you got people working at home, you got people working from hotels, you're having people whatever working outside the network and they need to get into the network, generally you would have to have VPN software. You would have software, and I had a customer with the state of Florida. They had, 1,200 people working from home, and you'd have to have 1,200 pieces of software on these machines, but you'd have to maintain the software on those machines, and if anything went wrong with those machines, you can't just go to someone's residence and work on the PC. It's very difficult. But to have a piece of client software on 1,200 devices, you might not want to do that. But if you do remote access through a session border controller like ours and possibly some others, you can do remote access and it'll know who you are. You don't have to have a VPN software, and it'll be a very secure connection. So we can talk more about that. But we have, now we're using IP Office Server Edition, so we have more than 300 plus users, probably different locations. In this situation, this might be, let's say, a high school, right? So the majority of devices that we have in the high school, including, our wireless access points, okay? We have a mobility device. That's an old type of mobility device we used to sell, but we have mobility devices that need to talk to the phone system because we have mobility software on that device. Could be an iPad, could be an Android, whatever, connected to the wireless network. But we don't need a phone system. We just need something to plug into, right? Now the reason why we'd have an IP office in this design is because we might have, again, out at the football field, maybe in the gym, we need a $39 phone, not a $239 phone or a $439 phone, right? We just need something easy to plug into the IP office. And probably the flaw in this design might be, the IP office would generally be plugged into a switch, and I'm not seeing it plugged into a switch, but that's just details. And then depending on the kind of mobile device that you buy from Avaya or from third-party vendors, you would connect it to a wireless access point and it would be able to get up to the IP office and route, from that standpoint. Now this is just a fun slide. And the reason why it's a fun slide is because, and we have two of these slides. Some things, the whole world's changing around us, and some things never change. And the reason for it is network convergence and hard dollar savings. Today you walk into a customer and you're still looking for ROI at all costs. Why should you, Mr. Customer, have me separate you from your money? Because I'm going to save you money by migrating your telephony, to a local area network. I'm going to put your voice on a network. You've just opened up an office, in Colombia, and you can make phone calls there, but you already have a data circuit there because, you're already pushing, your nightly batch jobs and everything across your data network. Why don't I put voice across the network and reduce, long distance charges, migrating, it onto the LAN. I don't have to have duplicate wiring. I can plug a phone into, or a PC into my phone and have one wire at the desktop. These seems like things that still apply today. I can minimize my moves, adds, and changes because it's, I'm going from, an older phone system to a new phone system that I can actually understand what it's doing. Look at the date on this slide. Yeah, I had this slide, I dusted it off and said, holy mackerel, upgrade my IP WAN for voice and data. There's actually customers out there today that don't have a wide area network connection. They're making long distance calls between two locations and they're not leveraging IP telephony. So there's a lot of good opportunity out there still. This is another one, look at the date at the bottom, where we're talking about unified messaging, actually taking the email and the voicemail and putting it in the same mailbox. I mean, that is so old school that it's kind of like, why aren't we doing more of that? Call center to contact center. If I have a contact center and people are emailing me or want to chat with me or doing things like that, I couldn't do that in the past. There's a lot of companies that haven't moved to social media yet. They're still receiving emails from customers, for support questions, things like that. If you need help, please email us now, or email us at this address. Well, what it'll do is I'll take phone calls in, and I'm going to manage my call center so that I'm taking 80% of my calls and answering them within 20 seconds. But if I get an email, I'll handle those within 4 hours, or maybe the next day. Or if a fax comes in, whenever I get a chance to walk over to the fax machine, although that call that came in from a fax machine is as important a call that is coming into the call center. But people don't, they don't grasp those concepts. And we've been doing this for a very long time and talking about it too. So I guess it's a sad state of affairs, but at the same time, there's opportunity out there to talk to customers about video conferencing. things of that nature. Now we're doing video conferencing, in the cloud. That's very simple, very easy to do. And for instance, for video conferencing, to have this set up, at a location would have to be $8,000-$10,000, and you'd have to have some integration work and somebody that can actually make the thing work. Now I can, order something in the cloud and we can spin it up in a day or two and we can have video conferencing, in no time. It's so simple. But a lot of companies still haven't, adopted that, Are you all selling video conferencing? Are you familiar with the Avaya video conferencing offer that's out there?
Which one?
Yeah, so $99 a month, I think that's retail. You get 50 user conferences. You can break that down into different, however you want to do it. But, you can have customers come in and do video conferencing for less than $100 a month.
And that's cloud?
That's cloud-based, yeah.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah. And if you buy it with powered by, the ScanSource powered by model, is the $5 a month offer still there? No, it's gone now?
Expired last quarter.
Okay, yeah, maybe it was the end of the quarter type of thing. So there's a lot of great technologies today that weren't available then, and people still haven't. So that's kind of leaving money on the table again. If you walk into a business and you're looking to do a migration or an upgrade, and you're not talking about voice rec, if you're not talking about solution selling, if you're not talking about video and customer care and unified integration with their existing Microsoft, you're leaving money on the table, because we do it all very, very well. And people might say, well, the services around it, oh my God, we got to get Avaya Professional Services, or our services guy don't know how to do it. Well, if there's an ROI for doing something, the customer's willing to pay good money to save money. So don't be afraid to start high and then work low. A lot of people walk into an opportunity and they give it their best shot, or they'll never be able to, they won't be asked to come back, But if you have the right conversation with the customer to begin with as a consultant, trying to save their money, trying to understand their business, then, there's something there. So does your customer understand the value of SIP? Does he have a whole bunch of, T1s or PRIs? Do they have mobile users that are trying to get into their system to, can I see the presence of a mobile phone from my desktop? Can I see what's going on in the network? Do I want to secure my data network with a session border controller? I've got SIP trunks, but my phone carrier says, you don't have to worry about a SBC. Or that agent who's just trying to make the sale is saying, you don't need an SBC. We've got it taken care of. I'd push back on a little bit. And, for session border controller, it's an uplift, but it's safety. It's secure for your customer. Higher level of customer service, which would mean what? Customer care, IPOCC, contact center, better lines of reporting. Do you have a question, Peter?
Can you flip back to your network designs?
Sure.
Please?
This one or this one?
In order for me to be in Greenville, I guess it'd be the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
So Greenville, and see whether you're on the phone in Charlotte, you'd have to take all the IP offices out of it and just have one system, or can I see presence over a small community network?
I believe you can see busy indications over
True presence.
true presence.
True presence.
Okay.
Even busy indication I wouldn't see, I don't think.
Well, there's a couple of things. Okay, so for instance, in the case you're talking about, I would have, if these were IP phones, generally IP phones are plugged into a switch, right? And they're not plugged into a gateway, they're plugged into a switch. And the only time I'm really using the gateway is if the network goes down and these connect. That switch that also has a leg connected to the gateway, I lose that, it rehones to here, right?
But the phones are registered to that IP office.
It depends if it is, though.
If you were looking for what you're talking about, they wouldn't be.
Yeah.
They would have the IP office as a backup.
Yeah, the IP office would simply be there as a
You could
backup.
go into the main switch.
Yeah. So maybe small community networking would be, kind of the wrong term in that situation. You can use small community networking, but what you're trying to accomplish is everybody would be like this
Right.
until the WAN goes down, then they would register to the IP office and come back up and running. Okay, and then if that's the case, then I'd be able to see presence, from the telephone. Make sense? Yeah. And that's probably how to do it more than not. Because like in the enterprise world, we have the
That's
G-series gateways.
Yeah, we have a customer that
Yeah.
has 300 locations, and each location has an IP office, but all the IP office does is back up the CM.
Yeah. And the main software that runs everything is not here, but it's at the main.
Right.
Yeah.
You said earlier, Pete, why do we offer analog and digital and IP? And your answer was because we can. And it does make a difference,
Yeah.
because if I'm designing a system and I'm competing with Cisco,
Mhm.
well, for Cisco redefines telephony to suit their view of the world.
Mhm.
For them, an analog station is 300 feet,
Yeah.
because it's a phone on an ATA on a switch.
Sure. It's
Whereas-
actually a data circuit, yeah.
Whereas for me, if I have an IP office, it's an analog station on a card, and it's 2 miles.
All right.
And that's old telephony. So there's a lot of old school telephony that the systems that are purely, quote unquote, purely IP, like Cisco, I would say 3Com back when they were around, I don't know who else is out there, that they can't do. And
ShoreTel today. It's MyTel, but, they couldn't do it.
well, Mintel's very similar.
Yeah.
At least the smaller
Yes.
platform is very similar to the IP
Yeah,
office.
absolutely.
So it just helps to, the more you know about what the customer's trying to accomplish, the more leverage you have for finding a solution that somebody else can't duplicate.
Where you find it more than anything is not in the SME and in the mid-market business, because, they're either analog and digital and they don't need to be IP, or they've just upgraded to pure IP. Where I found it a lot would be in the large enterprise, where I walked onto a campus like the University of South Florida, 30,000 phones, and 10,000 of those phones are analog devices. And for me to be able to go and put a PoE switch out there in all the different locations for 10,000 telephones, what's the value proposition? What's the ROI? There is none. If that phone is just being used as a blue light phone on campus, where I walk up and I pull the thing and it dials 911, why do I need a sophisticated IP? In a fiber or in a blah, 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 Maybe if they're building new buildings. The other thing would be is that people will say, IP, it's all, it's the coolest thing ever. But in a real enterprise where you have overhead paging and you have door locks and you have alarms and you have all this kind of stuff going on, what you're doing is you're reverse engineering all the technology to be IP. Because you can either forklift all these different manufacturers out that are doing all these door lock devices and everything, or you can have an analog circuit run into a door lock that's built for analog. So the reason why we do it is because we can, and it makes a lot of sense in large enterprise. I had the Orlando International Airport, MCO, when you make a reservations, they aren't able to go IP because to run a new wire in that building is so cost prohibitive. Yeah, there's no ROI, so they stay with their digital phones, because digital phones do go out 1,000 feet or more, and analogs maybe a couple miles. But so what they're doing is there's technology where, I forget who the manufacturer is that you all sell, you guys probably know what it is, where it'll take a data circuit, and then turn it into analog, and you can integrate with some of this stuff, or you can take a traditional old analog circuit and turn it into data. But to your point, there's a lot of reasons still out there in the world that we do what we do. Now, is it going away? Is it going to cloud? Is it doing all those type of things?
What the cloud is doing, from what I see, is it's taking us back 30 years.
Yeah.
Because most cloud systems are sold one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the features, here are the phones, it doesn't work like a key system. You're using a key system, it doesn't really fit your business, you'll get used to it. Don't call us back and complain because it doesn't work
Right.
the way your key system worked.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's a step backwards for somebody to be told, limited feature set, SIP trunks or SIP phones, and you're fitting a business into a box instead of fitting the box around the business.
Right.
But they're selling, people are selling like crazy.
So we're going to
Everyone's
talk.
selling.
We're going to talk about cloud after this. And what time is it? It's
1:48.
okay. So I got 15 more minutes. Private cloud. Does everybody understand what private and hybrid cloud is? We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's important because, I started my career in SME. I'm not an SME or mid-market bigot, but I've spent a lot of time in enterprise over the last probably 20 years. And what I found in the last probably 10 years is that you have CIOs, CTOs, CXOs that are looking to reduce their footprint. They're looking to secure their data, whether or not it's their CRM data or their telephony data or their voice or whatever, secured in their own data centers that they have, okay? And they want to move to a virtualized environment because they can maintain virtualization. It has backup and recovery capabilities without having to have high availability servers all over the place. I already own my servers, that type of thing. So you can have a private cloud where you're doing everything you do in a Amazon Web Services cloud, where you're taking an image and putting it up in the cloud, and everything registers to it. But now it's registering to their own hardened data center, and they get all the advantages of cloud-based technology without having to go out to the cloud. So now they can secure it, and it can be The other thing about the cloud is if this was a company, right, and I wanted to have a powered by product, from ScanSource, I can integrate that powered by product that's in the cloud, okay, and pay an OpEx model. This is all paid for, okay, or I have a lease on all of this. But I need to add an office, or I need to add a phone, or I need to add 5 phones, and I can go and get a powered by offer, and I can integrate it into this, so that I can call from here into there and take advantage of some of the technologies, and that would be a hybrid cloud kind of thing. And I'll show you kind of a hybrid cloud environment here in the next couple of, after the, well, I guess I'm going to launch into the cloud story.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, whether you like it or not. Answered your question? Yeah. Any other questions?
It's funny seeing your 2002 slide, because
You were there.
I was there, and some of those things were true and some were not.
Yeah.
Cisco pushed the thing about reduced move-out change expense, reduced network expense, but really, the big thing was have your IT people do all the telephony. Some companies did it, some companies didn't.
Yeah, voice is just an application on the network.
Voice is an application.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. And I think I walked out of a sales conference in 2002, and I was going, Cisco, why is everybody all, because we had the guest speakers, we had, watch out for Cisco, they're an up and comer, blah, blah, blah. They had bought the Celsius thing that didn't even come out with, music on hold. And you couldn't even do some of the basic stuff, that we've been doing like for 100 years.
I still have problems with their whole music.
Yeah.
I sold a Cisco system to an electric co-op and found out, the customer asked, they had a Nortel's system. They said, can we page all the phones? Cisco said, yeah, sure. Put the system in, cut it over. They came back to us and said, we can't page all the phones. Cisco said, yeah, you can page them one at a time.
Yeah, every phone one at a time.
That's what I mean by
Yeah.
redefining telephony. So they had to provide a separate server and an app for free to get the customer, to take care of what
Yeah.
the customer had asked for. So, but what I was going to mention that I like about Avaya is that the Avaya systems have more longevity in terms of CPE. Having sold Cisco, Nortel, ShoreTel, Mitel, I'd have Cisco equipment where we were having to replace servers before the lease was up.
Yeah.
And the phones were end of life before the lease finished. And that's a terrible conversation to have with a customer.
It is, and part of the networking world strategy is that the
Obsolescence.
technology is obsolescence. The technology is moving so fast, Mr. Customer, that you need to upgrade every 2 to 3 years. Where, in my world, where I was doing a territory sales, unless I was having a different conversation, I can forget about replacing that phone system for 8 more years,
I'm still finding customers that bought partner systems from me 20 years ago.
How about Merlin systems that are out there? There's thousands of them, and I got a slide on it, and I'll show you here. If it says it on the slide, it's got to be true. But my point about Cisco was this, is that I wasn't condemning Cisco. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. They do things very well, certain things very well. And in 2002, when I said, why do we care? And then by 2012, they were nipping at our heels and was a powerhouse. I mean, it was very, very, very competitive. And who do we need to watch out for today? That everybody's friend in the industry, we hate their software, but we can't live without them. Microsoft. If Avaya owned 26% of the market and Cisco owns 45% of the market, Microsoft owns 100% of the desktop, unless you're a Google or you're an Apple type environment where that's probably a rounding figure. Less than 10% of the entire market. So Microsoft, by being able to simply put software on the PC, which we've been doing for a very long time, they can make phone calls and communicate and do IM and presence and all that. What we do very well with Microsoft, just so you know, is they do IM and P, IM and presence, and we do video and voice. So we can integrate video and voice on the desktop with their IM and presence. Skype, us as a corporation, Avaya, we use Skype. We used to own Skype when we sold it to one of our parent company sold Skype to them. Made sense at the time if I told you a story there, which I won't. But we all play together. The Avaya stuff integrated to Microsoft, plugged into a Cisco network. That's standard. That's like, can you do that, Mr. Avaya? Well, that's they expect us to be able to do that. Some of my largest customers out there, tens of thousands of phones, always had a Cisco network. And you always had to integrate with it. No big deal.